time. You know, you deal with your coaches during the week, and I don't know how many weeks. Maybe some of you guys have been here for the whole summer. Maybe some of you are only here for a week or two, but I'm sure the coaches would tell you that this type of situation is what we all like as coaches. You know, I certainly like to be on the field with my team, and I really enjoy that, but you get a lot of satisfaction out of working with young fellas, I don't care what their age might be, and trying to teach them something that will help them. And then see that little smile on their face and that satisfaction come about when they can succeed in some way. So most all coaches that I know really enjoy the type of situation where you can teach somebody something and that's your emphasis rather than you know, trying to win games on the field. That'll come later on. Okay, my topic here today is on the mechanics of pitching, and I just spent an awful lot of time with this particular topic up in Canada. I was working some clinics up there for 2 weeks about a month ago, and we had a great time in New Brunswick. And one of the things that you find out is no matter where you go, there's certain problems that kids have at certain ages. And we work some of the time with some Little League kids and that age group, and then the rest of the time with guys anywhere from 13 to 20. But one of the things that we tried to stress with the younger kids, and this was regardless of what position it was, is to throw properly. Most guys don't throw right. And I hope that if I were to go back up there today, and if I were to ask even the 9 and 10-year-old kids what are the most important things in throwing, and regardless of your position, and I think most of those kids would be able to tell me that we want to extend our arm, we want to keep this front shoulder as a sight as to where we're throwing the ball, and we want to step to whoever we're throwing it or wherever we're throwing it. And as simple as those 3 things are, and as simple as they sound, we don't do them. Now, so if they're going to cause a problem for an outfielder, for a shortstop, for a catcher, of course, we don't want them to extend, but the other principle is the same. Imagine the problems they can cause to the guy that puts his foot on the finger up. Now, in dealing specifically with pitching, there's, you know, by the way, let me just mention very quickly, you know, lecture type situation, you know, it's probably not the greatest thing in the world also, but it gives us a chance to get the most information across in the least amount of time. But if you guys want to ask me a question as I go through, or if I say some things you don't believe them and you want to question them, or if I can help you in some way where it's just a general type question, feel free to raise your hand and ask me. If it's something where you think it would be better, where you want me to work with you for a couple of minutes later on off on the side, then maybe it might be better to wait on something like that. Okay, now, when we talk pitching, there's probably 3 things that are most important in pitching. Does anybody know what would be any of the keys to a successful pitcher? Yes, son. Control, exactly. Location, I call it. But control, that's certainly, probably the most important thing. Yes. Velocity is another one, okay? In other words, the speed of the ball. Now that may be the least important of the 3. It's the thing that all the scouts love to see, but as far as being a winning pitcher in high school or in college, might be the least important of the 3. Well, that's part of your mechanics and so forth, but I wouldn't classify it as one of the 3 most important. Exactly. Movement of the ball. And when I talk pitching mechanics, I can tell you guys how to get better location if you've got good mechanics, and how you can pick up a little bit of speed. I want you to understand this though, guys. You know, you get some coaches in here like I am today, or the coaches you deal with all year long, and we try and tell you things God only gave us a certain amount of talent. And no matter how hard you work, you might be the young ball player who is just not going to get better than that other guy. But you might want to remember this, that if you're equal to the other guy and you work harder than him, you're going to be better. So don't get discouraged, especially some of you guys that are a little smaller in size than somebody else. Don't get discouraged if things don't come as quickly. You know, I've got a 13-year-old son, and he started playing on this big diamond for the first time this year. Physically, he can't do it. He's too small. But I'm hoping that by teaching him the right way to do things, that when his body catches up with his brain, I guess you would say, then he's going to be able to do it. But he's got to wait a while, and some of you guys might have to do the same thing. Okay, now, in pitching mechanics, if your mechanics are off, it is going to affect the speed or velocity you get, and it's certainly going to affect the location. As far as movement, that deals with something else. Now, when I talk pitching mechanics, what we want to talk about is the easiest way for you to get the most out of your pitching. In other words, if we all have a choice of being better and putting less strain on our arm, boy, I would choose that way. I would choose that way to throw. Now, what we've got to do in something like that then is, by pitching mechanics, guys, we mean working in sync, synchronization. In other words, your arm must work with your body. Okay, your arm must work with your body. When they do not work together, then we're not getting the most out of ourselves, and we might be leading to an injury. And that's why pitching mechanics is so important. Now, when I talk pitching mechanics, I break it down into 3 parts. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend a little while now going through the 3 parts, tell you what's involved in each of the 3 parts, and hopefully if we have time, then I can show you if there's any differences when you pitch with the stretch. And then we can have time also to talk about some things like the grip on the ball and finger pressure and release, and maybe even warming up before a ball game. But pitching mechanics. Now we all know that pitchers are a rare breed, guys. I don't know how many of you guys at your age are just pitchers. But when you get up a little bit higher, many guys, you don't play, you only pitch. You don't play another position. And so therefore pitchers do things, they have their own conditioning program, they have their own duties during batting practice, they don't participate in some of the aspects of the game, but have to do more work in others, so they're different. And I guess because I put the glove on this hand, some people think that left-handed pitches are even more different than regular pitches. So if somebody ever thought that you were a little cuckoo, maybe it's because you stand up here on the hill and you throw with this left hand. But we all know us left-handed, we know that's not true. Okay, now, pitching. Okay, part 1 of our pitching mechanics. When we toe the rubber here, and most guys I like to see put about half of their foot over the rubber. You guys that have your steel spikes, you'll find it's much easier than if you have your foot up here. You put about half of the foot over the rubber, and it's going to make it easier for you to turn in. But the first part of our wind-up is simply just looking in, getting our sign, and coming up top like this here. Now, I will tell you right now, how many of you guys that are pitchers only come in here? Raise your hand. How many guys don't come over the top like this here? You just come in here. Okay? Nothing wrong with that, guys. Nothing wrong with that at all. 15 or 20 years ago, nobody did that. Everybody came over the top like this. But today, probably more than half of the guys don't go over the top. But it doesn't make you a good or a bad pitcher because you come into the chest area as opposed to coming over the top. But you've still got to remember certain things. So the first part of this wind-up, if you're a guy that comes into the chest area, this almost doesn't apply to you. All right, now, when I come over the top like this, I want to remember a couple of things. First thing, I've got the back of my glove to the batter. He cannot see the ball. I have put the ball up about in this position in my glove. I'm not running the ball down around the heel of the glove. Okay? I don't want him to see the ball. So as I come up and I'm looking right at Coach Zalabowski here, and he's in the home plate area, he's my catcher, and I come up like this here, and he cannot see the ball. Now, the other thing I want to remember in the first part of the windup is I don't like to see pitchers who come up top like this here and spread their arms like this. Number one, you can see the ball. But the other point, which is maybe even more important because it's going to affect your mechanics, is you're not going to get down into your second pot, which I'll get to in a minute, but you're not going to get into your second pot properly. So I like to see a guy come up, not with his elbows closed like this, obviously, but about at shoulder width apart. About at shoulder width apart when he comes up top. So the first part of your windup, if you can remember, you know, all you do, you start rocking. I got the back of my glove, ball up top of the glove, and my elbows are about shoulder width apart. Don't spread the elbows like this when you come up top. Okay? That's the first part of your windup. Sounds kind of simple. And it is the most simple part of the three parts. Okay? And it's the most simple part to understand because if you weren't doing something like that, I could probably correct you in about 30 seconds. And if you've got anything up here, you'll remember it forever. But the other parts aren't so simple. That's what makes pitching such a tough game. Now, the second part of the windup, I must do two things at once. I must, when I come up top here, I must turn my hips like this here. In other words, I'm pivoting in front of the rubber, and I'm turning my hips like this, and I must, I call it break my hand. In other words, get the ball out of the glove. I must do those two things in the second part of the windup. Turning of the hips, getting the hands apart. Now, that is a critical area. A lot of guys don't turn their hips. And you guys would be surprised. I'm sure you had a lot of batting instructions since you've been here. Right, guys? Yeah? Okay. And, geez, I'll tell you, of all people, you know, you're at the Ted Williams camp. Ted Williams' big thing is in regard to hips. And there's so many things that relate to hitting and pitching. You know, when we talk about hips as a hitter, you know, you want to coil and then you uncoil. Well, as a pitcher, a lot of pitchers just go like this here and throw with no rotation of the hips at all. And they're throwing with just their arm. What we want to do is we want to turn those hips, and then of course we've got to open them up. Okay, so the hips play an important part in pitching. But we can get a kid to turn his hips. You know, if we stand right aside of him and actually slow the kid down, and we can actually take a hold of him and move him so he gets the idea of turning his hips. How far do you think you ought to turn your hips? I don't know. What is halfway? Like this here? And then more? Yes. Till they point to the batter? What do you mean? My rear end? Point to the batter? I don't know. I got one hip here, one hip. This one over here points to the batter? Okay, that's not a bad rule. But I think you ought to go back with your leg so you're about parallel to the rubber. Go back with this leg so you're about parallel to the rubber. Doesn't do any good at all to go beyond that. Now, we've all seen pitchers who do that. And, you know, let me, you know, this reminds me of a little something here. You guys, you young guys maybe never saw him, but all us old timers, we all saw Tiant pitch. And, you you know, what happened at the time that he was going so great is every young kid wanted to imitate Tion. And you saw more kids off balance pitching. You've got to understand, guys, that these major leaguers who do things a little bit different from what us coaches tell you, they're the exception. They're so great. They've mastered many of the other things, and they are able to compensate and do things in a little different way. But you wouldn't want to teach somebody to start out that way. So I guess what I'm saying is, when you get up to the major leagues, if you want to throw like Tion and the manager lets you, then go ahead and do it. But when you're trying to learn how to pitch properly, that's not the way to learn how to pitch. You know, for instance, in Yaz's younger days, he used to carry the bat way up here. Jeez, all these little kids were running around with the bat up here. You know, you got to get to that hitting position first, and many kids couldn't get to that position. Yastrzemski could get there. As he got older, he realized he couldn't, and he made an adjustment. But what I'm saying is that if you walk away from my talk today, or anybody's talk at this camp, and you say, he said this, this, and this, I was watching the game last night, and so-and-so did things different. That's right, guys. You know, I wouldn't tell you, for instance, to come out here and throw like Kent Tekulve. Okay? But I'm not going to go and tell Tekulve to change, because he's found that to be most effective. But that's not the way you teach people to pitch. If you become a very good pitcher and eventually get into that type of motion, fine. Okay. So, the second part. Anybody remember what happens in the second part of the line? Yes. Go ahead. I was looking at him, but I heard a voice over here. Movement of what? Good. Okay, you're going to turn your hips. Okay, and then what happens?
What's the number on?
Break your hands. Now, there's a key. You have to break your hands at the right time. In other words, if I go like this here, pivot, start my body forward with my hands still together, and then break them, no good. Because now my arm has been left out here, my body is forward, and I've spread myself pretty open, and I'm going to put one heck of a strain right here. So, I must break my hands at the proper time. Now, the big question is, and this is crucial, because a lot of coaches don't recognize this, and it's something you really have to watch for in players. The point to break your hands, I tell my guys to break their hands in a vertical position, straight up and down, somewhere between the chest and the belt. In other words, like this here. As I come through. Just like this here. Alright? From the chest to the belt. When I break my hands, that ball must go down here. I don't want to go like this. Like this. Okay? I must go down here when I break my hands. So I'm going to break them, pot two, turn the hips, break the hands. Now I'm ready to come out. So that's the second part. All right, now, third part. The third part, I must get my arm in the proper arm. Now, when I break my hands, I am in this position here, okay? I'm in this position here. Now, I said I break my hands. What happens to my, where do I put the ball? Comes down here, right? Okay. Now, as I am opening my hips, my arm is following this type of a path, guys. Down here, 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 up. Notice the elbow up, and then out in front. It will follow this path from the time I break my hands, here, 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 here. When I get up about here, that's when this foot will have hit. All right? Now, That's the third part. The path of your arm and coming out, opening up the hips and coming out here. That's the third part of the wind-up. Now, let me review the three parts, and then I'm going to show you the places where you guys, I've never seen you play, but I'll tell you right now where you make your mistakes. Because everybody makes their mistakes in the same places, and the thing is that us coaches sometimes are not smart enough to detect those mistakes, because some of them are so minor. I'll give you a very quick example, guys. You've all heard of Bruce Sutter?
Yeah.
Who hasn't, right? Okay. You ever heard of Mike Rock? No, never heard of Mike Rock. He's the guy who made Bruce Sutter. Okay, but Mike Rock happens to be a friend of mine. I know Zalabowski over here, he knows who he is. And everybody from Rhode Island knows him. Mike Rock right now, some of you guys went to the Pawtucket Red Sox the other night? Well, Mike Rock's the pitching coach with the Pawtucket Red Sox. But before last year, Mike Rock's background had been as pitching coach of the Cubs, along with managing a lot of minor league teams. And he was a catcher for the Detroit Tigers back throughout the 60s. Now, what I'm getting at is Mike Rock, when Sutter was with the Cubs, Mike Rock was his pitching coach. Mike Rock, in my opinion, knows more about pitching than, I would just, myself, like I'm talking to you guys about pitching, but I like to talk to Mike about pitching. Every once in a while he comes up to my practices and we put him to work helping out maybe one kid or two kids who have some minor flaw, some problem that's so minute, but it's affecting them. And what they did last year, Sutter was going terrible at one point in the season. Now this tells you how tough pitching is. St. Louis pitching coaches or other coaches couldn't figure it out. What did they do? They called up Mike and they said, would you give us a hand? We're playing in Montreal tonight. Why don't you fly up there this afternoon and we'll meet you up there. So they had a game in Montreal. Sutter went out to the bullpen about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Mike worked with him for about a half an hour or so, straightened him out. Mike was on the plane and back here in Rhode Island before the game ever started up in Montreal. But the point being that pitching is tough to figure out, guys. And imagine how tough it must be if the guys on a major league team couldn't find out what Sutter was doing wrong, and they had to get a hold of somebody else. That's how tough it is. All right. A review of the three pots. Pot one. Up front, glove, ball high in the glove, back of the glove to the batter, elbow, shoulder width apart. Pot one. Pot two is the turning of the hips, bringing of the glove down so I break the hands in a position from the chest area to the belt and drop the ball right down around there. Guys, it probably won't mean a heck of a lot to you at your age right now, but what you want to do when you drop that ball down is drop it down the natural way, which is like this here. Don't drop down like this. See how I've hooked my wrist like this? Because when we talk pitching, guys, we want to be what I call tension-free. And the place where I don't want to see any tension is in that forearm. That forearm should be soft all the way through the wind-up until you get up here. So if I come down, you just try it, while you're sitting there, or if you wanted to stand up and try it later on, that if you just drop your hand, pick up your leg and drop your hand like this, that forearm should not be, shouldn't have a muscle. But if you turn your wrist like this, that provides some tension in there. You don't want tension as a pitcher. Okay? And when you turn that wrist in, you've provided some tension, which you don't want. So just drop the ball down naturally. Okay? That's your second part. Third part is what you must follow this path. Here, here, and over here when I hit. This path, like this here. Just like this, that path. Now, if you throw, a lot of kids get confused by this. I yell at them, get your arm up. And what they think is I want them to throw directly overhand, and I don't. But I want them to be free. You can't be what we call a short armor. Okay? Now, let me tell you your problem areas. Number one, you guys, the biggest mistake young kids make is they short arm. In other words, you come like this here, and you go like this. Instead of dropping down and following that path, you come in here like this. In other words, you're not getting full arm extension. You're short arm. That's one problem. The other problem is, when you short arm, you almost always have your elbow down in here. And when you don't have it down in there, the other problem is that you come out here like this, but you come in here and you drop your elbow like this. Good pitchers even do this, but they've got to be told they're doing it so they don't do it all the time. That's the quickest way to hurt yourself, guys, is throwing like this when you're dropping that elbow. And I'll tell you, it's easy to spot. It's not something that's difficult for a coach or even a teammate to pick up. That's a very simple thing to spot. And I see a lot of guys now. Anybody here a catcher? Okay, you catchers, if you don't learn all you can learn about pitching, you guys are fools. Catchers are the first guys in a ball game who know when a pitcher's losing something. And they're the first guy that can help him out. They can help him out before a manager or a pitching coach or anybody else. So you guys ought to try and learn all you can about pitching. And I just